In a school where the days passed the same, between lines in the cafeteria and lessons copied on the board, something strange was about to happen. Not with fanfare, but with a barely perceptible, muffled sound coming from a place everyone ignored. A sound that could have been forgotten, like so many other noises that are part of everyday life, but which by chance or fate was heard by someone who should never have heard it. Malik Johnson was just another student among many, a 13-year-old. Black boy, accustomed to walking silently through the hallways, invisible to his teachers, his classmates, and even the principal herself, who called him quiet, with a formal, hasty smile. He wasn't the popular one, nor was he the troublemaker. He was the kind of kid the school forgets, the adults underestimate, but who sees everything. And on that seemingly ordinary morning, as he reached for his juice at the back of the cafeteria, he heard something. It was a different sound. A short click, then a slow drag, and then a whisper. Faint, muffled, coming from behind the industrial freezer. Instinctively, Malik moved closer. He pressed his ear to the wall. He waited, and the sound came again. At that moment, he could have backed away. He could have ignored it, as most people would. But something inside him, perhaps an inner voice, perhaps the weight of a lifetime of being ignored, told him this wasn't normal, and that if he didn't do anything, no one would. What Malik discovered back, they didn't just shock the school administration. It didn't just prompt the police to surround the block. What he found shook the foundations of an entire city. And now, to understand how it all began, we need to go back. Back to the exact moment when the silence of the cantina was interrupted by a sound that Malik was the only one to hear. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. The next graveyard tales are even more disturbing. Malik Johnson was only 12 years old, but his eyes held a depth not seen in other children his age. Living in the neighborhood of Oak Ridge, a simple neighborhood dotted with small, worn-down brick houses, he learned early to cope with his father's absence and his mother's exhausting routine, working as a supermarket clerk during the day and a hospital cleaner at night. Often, when she arrived home, she no longer had the strength to talk, and Malik learned to be content with silence, filling the hours with drawings on crumpled paper that he kept inside his backpack. At school, he didn't stand out. He always sat in the back of the room, discreet, with his notebooks organized and his gaze attentive to everything that happened. Some classmates called him invisible, not because he was too withdrawn, but because he seemed to live in another world, observing details no one else noticed. For him, every gesture, every shadow, every unusual sound was like a warning. He was the kind of boy who noticed when a window remained open even on rainy days, or when a staff member suddenly changed their daily route through the school hallways. Despite his curious nature, Malik rarely spoke. When he tried to share his insights, he received disdainful looks, muffled laughter, or even scolding, as if he were making up stories to get attention. This constant rejection made him even more silent, creating a dangerous conviction in his mind that no one would ever believe him. But behind this silence lay a keen, almost instinctive sensitivity that would soon place him at the center of something much greater than he could have imagined. In his few free moments, Malik enjoyed cycling through the neighborhood's narrow streets, feeling the wind on his face and gazing at the graffitied walls that seemed to hold secrets from another era. He often stopped in front of an electronics store window, fascinated by the cameras. He dreamed of owning one, not just to capture images, but to prove that what he saw and heard wasn't a figment of his imagination. That particular week, Malik was more tired than usual. He'd spent entire nights listening to his mother's footsteps arriving late, and the sound of her key turning in the door lock, always brought him a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because she was back, sadness because he knew that for her, life was a daily battle of endurance. Perhaps it was this early awareness of his mother's struggle that made him more attentive, more mature, and more aware that the world concealed things that adults wouldn't admit out loud. It was just the beginning of the week when he walked into the school cafeteria with his blue plastic tray. The smell of frozen pizza and fries mingled with the hum of his classmates' conversations. Malik chose a table in the corner, away from the hustle and bustle, and put on his now dead headphones, just to pretend he was busy. It was at that moment that something caught his attention. A faint, muffled sound coming from behind the industrial freezer. He frowned and tilted his head, trying to decipher if it was just a normal machine noise or something more. And in that moment, without knowing it, Malik took the first step towards a secret that would change not only his life, but that of the entire city. The noise seemed insignificant at first, like a muffled click or the creaking of something loose. But to Malik, it didn't sound like a simple equipment malfunction. He knew the industrial freezer, the constant hum it emitted during operation. And this sound wasn't typical. It was metallic, irregular, as if someone had scratched the inside of the wall with restrained force. Malik kept his eyes fixed on the freezer. His classmates continued to laugh loudly, throwing fries at each other and ignoring anything but their own amusement. To them, there was nothing unusual about it. But in the corner of the cafeteria, Malik felt his heart race. The sound returned, this time more distinct, as if a light thud had reverberated in the empty space behind the wall. He removed the headphones he'd been wearing only as a disguise and leaned in slightly, trying to hear better. The noise suddenly stopped, plunging the room into a suffocating silence for those expecting a repeat. Malik blinked a few times, wondering if he was just tired or imagining things. But his intuition told him otherwise. Something was wrong, very wrong. He decided to tell a group of nearby classmates. He approached cautiously, and in a low voice said he'd heard something strange behind the freezer. The laughter came quickly, almost instantly. "You've been watching too many movies, Malik," one of the boys mocked, while another added, "If there's something in there, it must be a rat." The words felt like a barrier, reinforcing the feeling that no one would ever take him seriously. Feeling the weight of indifference, Malik returned to his desk. But the unease didn't disappear. Instead, it grew within him like a persistent whisper, beckoning his attention, demanding an answer. His eyes couldn't leave the freezer, and his mind whirled around the question, what could be hidden behind that wall? That afternoon, as the other students headed to their gym class, Malik remained silent, trying to plan a way to return to the cafeteria alone. There was something that needed to be seen up close, something no one else seemed willing to see. The sound he'd heard that morning would be just the beginning of a series of disturbing signs, growing ever clearer, ever harder to ignore. And Malik was about to discover that the closer he got to the truth, the greater the danger that stalked his steps. When the afternoon fell and the corridors of Jefferson Middle School as the cafeteria began to empty, Malik realized this was his chance. The cafeteria, previously filled with voices, laughter, and the clattering of trays, was now plunged into a heavy silence, interrupted only by the hum of refrigeration equipment. The badufo, sweet smell of food stored the day before hung in the air, creating a stifling atmosphere. With cautious steps, he approached the industrial freezer, the same one that had caught his attention that morning with a strange sound. He stopped in front of it, took a deep breath, and placed his small hands on the metal side. The cold surface ran through his skin like a shiver. He gathered his courage and pushed hard. The freezer slid a few inches, producing a deep creak that echoed through the empty cafeteria. Behind him, Malik immediately noticed a difference. The wall didn't feel as solid as it should have. He touched it with his knuckles and heard a hollow, distinct sound, as if there were nothing but a thin layer separating the space from something hidden. His heart raced. He knew he was facing something that didn't fit into the routine of a normal school. As he crouched down, he noticed marks on the floor, deep scratches in the tile, as if heavy objects had been dragged across it. Repeatedly, he ran his fingers over the marks and felt the roughness of the grooves. This was no accident. Suddenly, a crack resounded. Malik recoiled, startled, nearly dropping his backpack. The sound seemed to come from within the wall itself. He stood still, trying to control his breathing. For a moment, he considered running away, forgetting everything and pretending he hadn't seen anything. But his curiosity, stronger than his fear, kept him rooted to the spot. With trembling hands, he pulled a pencil from his backpack and began tapping it lightly against different spots on the wall. The sound varied. In some places it was solid, but in others it was distinctly hollow. And it was at that point that Malik realized there was an empty space behind that wall. Swallowing hard, he pressed his ear against it and tried to listen. The silence seemed absolute, but there was a strange vibration, as if a secret were about to be revealed. A mixture of excitement and dread washed over him. In that moment, Malik understood he was facing a discovery that could change everything. He didn't know if he could explain it or if anyone would believe him, but he was certain he had to go back and investigate further, even if alone. He put the freezer back in its original place, making sure nothing looked out of the ordinary. He grabbed his backpack and left the cafeteria, but his gaze remained restless, carrying the certainty that something was hidden, waiting to be revealed. What Malik didn't yet know was that by trying to share his discovery, he would face not only disbelief, but also rejection and even threats. And this resistance would only push him deeper into the mystery. The next morning, Malik could barely concentrate on his first few classes. The image of the wall behind the freezer wouldn't leave his mind. He scribbled in his notebook without realizing it, drawing lines that resembled secret corridors and hidden doors. With each new scratch, the sense of urgency grew. He needed to tell someone. He needed someone to believe him. During recess, he summoned courage and approached the principal, Mrs. Collins, who was hurrying through the halls with a stack of papers in her arms. Malik held tightly to his backpack and called out to her in a timid voice, "Principal Collins, I think there's something strange behind the cafeteria freezer." She stopped, adjusted her glasses on her face and sighed, as if she had heard yet another piece of nonsense. "Malik, dear, that freezer is over 20 years old. It makes noise, it creaks, it even looks like it's going to collapse, but everything's fine. Don't worry about it, just focus on your studies, okay?" Before he could respond, she had already walked away, leaving only the echo of her cold words in the hallway. Malik felt his stomach sink. Later, he tried to speak to the caretaker, Mr. Harris. He found him in the courtyard, pushing a cart of tools. The tall, grim-faced man looked at the boy with an expression that mixed impatience and irritation. "Mr. Harris, I heard a strange noise behind the freezer. I think there's something there." The janitor stopped walking, slowly looked up, and narrowed his eyes. For a moment, Malik thought he was going to laugh at the situation, but instead, he received a dry reply. "Listen, kid, you should stop making up stories. That kind of thing only causes trouble. Mind your own business." There was a brief, tense pause. The man's tone didn't sound like a simple warning. It was harsher, almost threatening. Malik felt a shiver run down his spine, as if he'd crossed an invisible line by mentioning the subject. The rest of the day was torment. His classmates mocked him, spreading rumors that Malik was going crazy, hearing voices within the walls. Some imitated metallic noises in the hallway just to laugh at his reaction. Each laugh stung like a knife, but at the same time, it strengthened his conviction. There was something wrong at that school, and he was the only one willing to see it. When he got home, he tried to tell his mother, but she, exhausted after a long shift at the hospital, just stroked his hair and told him not to worry about anything. Malik sat in silence, staring at the ceiling of his room, his eyes wide open in the darkness. No one believed him. No one ever would. But deep down, this rejection planted another seed. If he couldn't trust the adults, he would have to act alone. And, driven by a silent determination, Malik made the decision. That would change everything. He would return to that place, not just to listen, but to discover what was truly hidden behind that wall. That night, Malik could barely sleep. The metallic sound echoed in his mind, as if he were still standing in front of the freezer. He tossed and turned in bed, his heart pounding in time with anguish. The janitor's words still sounded like a threat. But instead of pushing him away, they awakened a determination he'd never felt before. If no one believed him, then he would have to seek the truth alone. The next morning, while his classmates played in the playground, Malik remained in the library, pretending to read a random book. In reality, he was waiting for the right moment to sneak into the cafeteria without attracting attention. He carried his older brother's old cell phone, which had a scratched camera, but still worked well enough to record videos. It wasn't just curiosity. It was the need to gather evidence, something that would prove he wasn't imagining things. The clock on the wall marked the end of recess as Malik walked through the nearly deserted hallways. When he reached the cafeteria, the place was empty, except for the distant echo of voices coming from other rooms. His footsteps were too loud against the tile floor, and he held his breath for a moment, fearing discovery. Still, he continued. He approached the freezer. He set his backpack on the floor and positioned his cell phone in his small hands. He pushed the heavy equipment with all the strength he could muster. The freezer slid a few inches, revealing the strange wall once again. Malik filmed every detail, the marks on the floor, the hollow sound that repeated when he rapped his knuckles, the clear sensation of a hidden space behind it. Suddenly, he noticed something he hadn't noticed before. A small crack in the lower corner of the wall, barely visible, but letting out a breath of cold air. Heart pounding, he knelt down and brought his face closer. There really was something beyond that spot. Gathering his courage, he pulled a school knife he used to sharpen pencils from his backpack and began scraping around the crack. The plaster peeled away in small fragments, revealing a narrow opening. His heart beat so fast it seemed to echo through the silent room. Finally, with a soft crack, part of the plaster gave way, revealing a hand-sized hole. Malik brought his phone closer and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light passed through the opening, illuminating a dark space behind the wall. What he saw took his breath away: stacked boxes covered in dust, and what looked like a chair lying in the corner. The place looked more like a secret storage room than any other structure in the school. He reached in as far as he could and touched one of the boxes. He felt the rough surface of the cardboard and pulled with effort. The box slid a few inches, revealing that the space was deeper than it appeared. A distant noise made him freeze. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Malik turned off the flashlight and backed away quickly, pushing the freezer back with difficulty. He grabbed his backpack and ran for the cafeteria exit, his heart racing as if he would be caught at any moment. Reaching the empty hallway, he leaned against the wall, panting, trying to calm himself. He hadn't been discovered, but the certainty overwhelmed him. Behind that wall lurked something too big to ignore. In the following days, Malik returned more often. Always at different times, always with his cell phone in hand. He filmed short clips, investigating every detail. His life began to revolve around that secret. He no longer paid attention in class, nor could he joke with his classmates. All that mattered was discovering what was in that place. And it was on one of these solitary visits that he found something even more disturbing. Yellowed papers bearing children's names, some crossed out, others dated years ago. The discovery made his breath a catch in his throat. This wasn't just a forgotten deposit, it was a record, a hint that something dark lurked there. But just as he began gathering up the papers to take with him, a heavy noise echoed down the hallway. It was as if someone had pushed open a door. Malik froze. He was no longer alone. Malik held his breath and stood still, the yellowed papers still clutched in his trembling hands. The sound of heavy footsteps grew closer and closer, reverberating off the cafeteria walls like a warning of danger. He turned off his phone's flashlight and huddled behind the freezer, trying to make himself invisible. His heart was pounding so hard it seemed to betray his presence. The cafeteria door opened slowly, creaking in a way that heightened the tension. A shadow fell across the floor, illuminated by the dim light from the hallway. Malik clutched the papers to his chest, as if to protect him. Then a deep voice he knew all too well broke the silence. "Who's there?" "Era Mr. Harris." The caretaker, the same one who had dismissed his words days before. He entered slowly, clutching a set of keys that jingled with each step. His eyes scanned the room with a frightening calm, as if he knew exactly what he was looking for. Malik remained still, silently praying that he wouldn't be discovered. The man approached the freezer and paused for a moment. He touched the metal side with his rough hand, took a deep breath, and muttered something inaudible. Then he took 2 steps back, looked around and left, closing the door behind him. Malik remained hidden for a few more seconds until he was sure he was alone. Only then did he allow himself to breathe deeply. But the fear didn't diminish, only grew. If Mr. Harris was prowling the cafeteria like that, perhaps he knew the secret the wall hid. Perhaps he was responsible for it. Still trembling, Malik went back to examining the papers. They were lists of children's names and old dates, some with quick notes beside them. He recognized at least 2 names. He'd seen their faces on faded, missing posters, still plastered on the bulletin board at the city police station. His entire body froze. It couldn't be a coincidence. He stuffed the papers into his backpack and hurried out, looking up and down the hallway. With each step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. When he finally reached the library, he sat down at an empty table and spread the papers out before him. The contents confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just a secret repository. It was part of something larger, something involving child disappearances, and somehow connected to the school. Malik's mind raced. Every detail fit together like puzzle pieces. The noise behind the freezer, the false wall, the hidden papers, the janitor's threatening reaction. Everything pointed to a dark secret that had been buried, but not erased. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself. He needed to find a way to show the world. But he also understood that trying to expose what he'd discovered would put himself at risk. As he thought of a plan, a chill ran down his spine. What if Mr. Harris already knew he'd found the papers? What if he was just waiting for the right moment to silence him? Malik closed his backpack and looked up at the library window. The sun was setting, tinting the sky with shades of orange and purple. But to him, the landscape seemed like a harbinger of danger. There was no turning back. The secret was in his hands, and his next move could determine not only his life, but also the revelation of something that would shake the entire city. That night, Malik fell asleep late, hugging his backpack as if it were his only defense. He didn't know it, but from that moment on, he wasn't just investigating. He was being hunted. The next day, Malik walked through the school hallways with his backpack strapped tightly to his shoulders. The feeling of carrying dynamite accompanied him with every step. Inside the backpack, the papers revealing the names of missing children burned like fire against his back. He couldn't get rid of them, but he also didn't know who to trust. Every adult face he passed seemed to hide a shadow, and the memory of Mr. Harris's hand touching the freezer haunted him like a ghost. During science class, Malik couldn't pay attention. His gaze wandered out the window, but the tension was so intense that he almost missed the janitors passing in the hallway, giving him a quick, intense, cold look. The boy's heart raced. This wasn't a coincidence. Harris knew. Maybe he even knew exactly why the papers had disappeared from behind the wall. During recess, Malik tried to blend in with the other students, but the feeling of being followed kept him alert. As he left the cafeteria, he noticed footsteps following his own, steady and heavy. He picked up his pace, turning down different hallways, but the footsteps repeated themselves, echoing just behind him. He glanced back discreetly and saw Harris standing in the distance, watching him with fixed eyes and an unreadable expression. Fear rose in waves. Malik entered the men's room and locked himself in one of the stalls, holding his breath. The silence was broken only by the sound of dripping faucets. Then he heard the bathroom door slowly open. Slow footsteps stomped across the floor, echoing in the empty space. "I know you've been too curious, kid." Harris's deep voice broke the air, dragging out the words like a veiled threat. Curiosity can be dangerous. Malik's heart hammered in his chest, almost as loud as the dripping of the faucet. He closed his eyes, praying for the heavy feet to move away. After a few seconds that felt like eternity, the footsteps receded and the door closed with a sharp click. When he emerged from the bathroom, Malik was pale, but he had made a decision. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed to show this evidence to someone outside the school's reach. He needed to run to the police. That afternoon, as he left the building, he noticed a black car parked across the street. The windows were rolled up and the engine was off, but Malik swore someone was inside watching his every move. He quickened his pace, pretending not to notice, and headed home. But even there, the feeling of being watched didn't disappear. That night, as he tried to organize his papers again, he heard a sharp knock on the front door. His mother had already left for her shift at the hospital, and Malik froze. The knocking repeated, louder, more impatient. He tiptoed to the living room window and peeked through a crack in the curtains. The same black car was parked in front of his house. Malik recoiled, his heart racing. Someone wanted to silence him, and there was no doubt that the secret he had uncovered was too big to keep hidden for long. The boy spent the rest of the night awake, lying in bed with his backpack clutched to his chest, listening to every sound that came from the street. Every crackle, every distant engine, every shadow cast by the streetlights seemed to announce that danger was getting closer. He knew if he didn't act quickly, he might not have time to reveal the truth. But what Malik didn't yet imagine was that very soon the revelation would emerge from the shadows and explode before the entire city. The next morning, Malik arrived at school more determined than ever. The sleepless night and the memory of the knock on the door were still fresh in his mind. But now, something stronger was inside him. The certainty that he had to act. He couldn't wait for the threat to grow. He couldn't allow the secret to remain hidden. He knew he wouldn't have the courage to go straight to the police station alone, but there was one police officer he trusted, the officer Ramirez, who used to patrol the neighborhood and had spoken to him a few times. Malik waited for classes to end, remained silent, and when he saw the police car parked near the school gate, he ran to it. "Officer Ramirez," he called in a broken voice, clutching his backpack tightly. "I need to show you something. It's important." The officer looked at him in surprise, but he saw the seriousness in the boy's eyes. Malik opened his backpack with trembling hands and showed him the yellowed papers. Ramirez took them carefully, read a few names, and paused for a moment, his expression growing more somber with each page. "Where did you find this, Malik?" he asked, his voice now thick with urgency. The boy hesitated, but then he told him everything. The noise, the false wall behind the freezer, the boxes, Mr. Harris's menacing look. Ramirez listened in silence without interrupting and finally said simply, "You did the right thing. Now leave this to me." Hours later, the school was surrounded by patrol cars, and yellow police tape blocked access to the cafeteria. Journalists pushed microphones, trying to extract any information from the officers while helicopters hovered overhead. Inside the building, investigators searched every corner, capturing footage and removing boxes and documents that confirmed Malik's story. Outside, parents wept as they heard the names of those who had been marked missing for years. The murmur of the crowd turned into a cry for justice. The school, which until then had been a symbol of safety for hundreds of families, now revealed itself to be the site of a macabre secret. And Malik? He sat on the stairs, watching everything with wide eyes. There was no joy in being heard, only a mixture of fear and relief. He had been the trigger that triggered the explosion of truth, but deep down, he knew the worst was not over yet. The secret was out, but those who kept it were still at large. That late afternoon, as reporters broadcast live and the entire city was plunged into shock, Malik realized that his life would never be the same again. Night fell over the city, but the Jefferson Middle School remained as bright as ever. Floodlights were installed in the courtyard, patrol cars lined up with their sirens off, and federal agents worked side by side with local police. What had once seemed like a rumor had now become a full-scale operation. Malik watched from the sidewalk, protected by a social worker who offered him a bottle of water. He couldn't drink. His eyes were fixed on the canteen, as if trying to penetrate the walls and see what was still hidden within. A helicopter hovered overhead, casting a bright white light over the building. Armed, police officers formed up, some with sniffer dogs. Every minute new boxes were removed, but there was something that had yet to be revealed: the extent of the hidden space behind the false wall. Malik knew the hole he had found was just the beginning. Inside the school, officers broke through the structure behind the freezer with heavy sledgehammers. The sound of the blows echoed through the empty hallway until the wall finally gave way, revealing a narrow passageway leading down makeshift steps. The air that escaped was cold, damp, and musty. One of the officers turned on his flashlight and went down first, followed by the others. Malik couldn't see from where he stood, but he could hear the nervous murmurs and the rapid movement. Then a scream echoed from within the space. Soon after the news spread, there were people down there, children. The scene that followed was like something out of a nightmare. One by one, boys and girls were brought out, covered in thermal blankets, their eyes wide open, some crying, others in absolute silence. Ambulances parked in the courtyard received the small survivors, and doctors rushed to examine them. The shock on the faces of the parents who had rushed to the scene was indescribable. Many screamed, others broke down in tears, hugging the children they thought were lost forever. Malik watched in silence, his heart pounding. His hands trembled, and he could barely breathe. This was bigger than anything he could have imagined. These weren't just ancient documents or forgotten records. This was real. Children were there, hidden beneath the school, living in inhumane conditions. Amid the commotion, Mr. Harris's name appeared on the police radios. A team had been dispatched to his home, and another was searching the school's maintenance room. Shortly afterward, word spread among the officers. The janitor and 2 accomplices had been arrested red-handed, attempting to flee the city. The relief was immediate, but not complete. Malik knew that even prison would not give those children back the years they had lost. Still, he felt a strange mixture of pride and pain. He had made a difference. He had been the link that allowed their release. As helicopters took off and ambulances left the school for the hospital, Malik stepped back, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk. The night was cold, and the stars shone shyly in the sky, as if silently observing the fate of a city that would never be the same. But amid the roar of the patrol cars and the emotional tears of the families, something inside him wouldn't quiet, a nagging feeling that the story wasn't over yet, that even after the rescue, secrets remained buried beneath layers of silence and fear. 2 days after the operation, the entire city gathered in the City Hall auditorium. The space, usually used for small meetings, was packed. Parents, teachers, reporters, and residents filled every seat, and many remained standing, eager to hear from the authorities. On the stage, the mayor, some police officers, and community members were organizing themselves. But among them all, there was a reserved seat for a 12-year-old boy who had previously gone unnoticed. When Malik entered with his mother, silence fell across the auditorium. He walked with short steps, his eyes lowered, visibly embarrassed by the sudden attention. His mother, tears in her eyes, held his hand tightly, proud, though still in disbelief that the son who had always been called invisible had become the center of this story. The mayor took the microphone and in a solemn voice announced, "Today we are here to recognize the courage of a boy who saved lives." Malik Johnson saw what many ignored and, even when disbelieved, persisted until he revealed the truth. A loud applause echoed through the auditorium, growing into a collective roar. Malik stood motionless for a few seconds, stunned by the scene. He didn't want to be a hero. He wasn't looking for medals or applause. He just wished someone had listened when he first said something was wrong. Police officers approached and presented him with a symbolic certificate of bravery. Mrs. Collins, the principal, rose from the audience, her face etched with shame, and walked toward him. Her voice breaking, she said, "I should have listened to you, Malik. I'm sorry." He simply nodded silently. The pain of being ignored still echoed within him, but in that moment, the feeling of finally being seen began to fill the void. His mother hugged him tightly, whispering in his ear, "You changed everything, son." Despite the heat of the moment, Malik still carried in his eyes the shadow of what he had seen behind the wall. He knew that not all the secrets had been revealed, and that the silence of the city hid more than he cared to admit. And as the applause still echoed through the auditorium, Malik glanced out the side window and lost himself for a moment. Because, even amidst the celebration, something inside him warned him the story wasn't over yet. The morning after the recognition, Malik woke early. The city was still silent, as if bearing the weight of recent events. He got dressed, shouldered his backpack, and headed to school. The eyes that had previously pierced him now followed him every step of the way. Some classmates called his name, others smiled shyly, but Malik didn't respond. He simply walked to the school bus and sat by the window. The car drove off slowly, passing through the narrow streets of Oak Ridge, where residents still whispered about the secret network discovered beneath the school. Malik leaned his head against the cool glass and watched the houses pass like shadows. He felt different, but he wasn't sure he liked the feeling. There was no pride, only a heavy silence in his chest, as if the world had shown its cruelest face too soon. Arriving at the school, the scene was eerie. There were security guards at the entrance, police officers on duty, and yellow tape still cordoning off part of the cafeteria. The place looked the same, but it wasn't. Malik walked into the empty courtyard and, for a moment, stood there, feeling the icy wind touch his face. It was as if the school itself had become a wounded body, marked by scars that would never fade. Later, on his way home, he boarded the bus again. The sky was covered in heavy clouds, and a news report on the driver's radio reported another suspected case in a nearby town. Malik looked up, staring at the horizon beyond the window. The feeling returned, the premonition that this wasn't over. He opened his sketchbook and wrote a short sentence on the last page. Some secrets never stay hidden forever. He closed the notebook and pressed it to his chest, as if it held not only scribbles, but also the certainty that his story was not yet complete. And so, in silence, Malik returned home, without imagining that what was to come would be even more disturbing. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you. So subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell, and don't miss the next exciting and mysterious stories that will captivate you from beginning to end. Your subscription is what allows us to continue bringing you intense stories like this one.